unless we are going to ask the questions at the end. You can start, sir.
Let me start my video first. Are you able to see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
So sharing my screen now. Tell me if it's visible. Danika, can you see the screen?
Yeah. It's visible, sir.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll start. Thanks for the sweet introduction, Sanika. I think like you've done your homework on my LinkedIn.
Yeah,
But
LinkedIn.
yeah. Awesome. I hope all of you guys are doing very well, enjoying your holidays. I hope your compre was also good. Um,
To join any voice channel, you have to just click on these voice channels. So choose one. So choose which channel you want to join. You can distribute like going to crowd one channel specifically, and yeah.
Wait, sorry, I was not able to hear properly. Can any one of you repeat?
I think someone accidentally unmuted themselves.
Yeah, let me know whenever that happens. I'll still try to follow the rules. It's almost going to get over by 15 minutes. Yeah, maybe people.
Ujjwal, could you please mute yourself? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can the
Sorry
host
for the disturbance.
mute someone? Or
I think it would be better.
okay. It's fine. I'll try to adjust with all the background noises. Um, uh, okay. Getting back to my introduction, I would still like to introduce myself as 2013 A4 PS 361G, Mechanical Department 2017 pass out. And today's talk is more about the new generation, next generation sensors, which are remarkably precise and how it exactly works. Um, I'll try to talk more about applications, but also industry standards that we follow, how the engineering part works, and what you can look for in these sectors in future. So the talk is structured in a way that it's divided first in the work of Atominix, what we are doing, the challenges we have taken up, and then towards the working principle of atomic interferometry. Because it's not very intuitive. So counterintuitive things like these can be broken down into analogies. So we'll try to understand the same phenomena in three levels, each layer being slightly deeper and complex than the previous one. You can stop me wherever you want, but it's not important to understand 100% of it. It takes years to understand that. I'm still midway somewhere. Uh, yeah, and then in the last part of the talk, we can go over my roles and responsibilities as a mechanical engineer and what I execute on to get the apparatus ready for the physicists uh, to conduct their experiments. So, yeah, these sensors we are going to talk about are not like general sensors, which are optic, electric, or acoustic. These sensors have something to do with motion. So, and motion can comprise of acceleration and rotation. There is also a part of the sensor which measures force, and then we are going to exploit that facility to measure gravity. So, the acceleration due to gravity or gravitational force. Importance of that is not very famous right now because it still remains in more of the urban planning and resource exploration agencies. So gravity values, or the value of G as we know of it, is 9.8, but every precision that adds to it reveals immense information about what your planet consists of. So underground structure, over the land structures surrounding planets, anything, everything, because everything has mass and everything will exert a force. So gravity uh, also has a fingerprint. A gravity signature is present everywhere in the outer space as well. So your location can be found out using gravity, but we'll talk about gravity fingerprinting later and other navigation systems before that, which do not actually use gravity. So because you also do not measure gravity or gravity equipments in your daily life, there is something that you use in your daily life which is related to acceleration and rotation. um, Accelerometers and gyroscopes, these things are embedded in your mobile phones. The moment you tilt your screen, it changes from portrait to landscape. How that happens is totally dependent on that small chip which is there in your main circuit board. So a lot of students have already worked on maybe drones which try to navigate themselves using MPU 6050 or like these standard modules which has accelerometer and rotation. Your mobile is very good at measuring steps. Like a good student would be completing around 5,000 steps if he's attending all the lectures on campus. If your attendance is low, then maybe your daily step count would be lower. So things like that that you daily use, your running speed, or all these Fitbit bands, small robots or drones, they have accelerometer sensors. There is one peculiar thing you might have noticed about your mobiles, which is you keep the GPS on, but still it somehow manages to track your location, and not location exactly, but also the route you have taken while jogging or doing something. How does that happen? So if you know how much you're walking or how many steps you're taking and in what direction you're moving, you can map out the route. And that is basically called an inertial navigation system. The GPS that we use cannot work underground because the satellite signals won't penetrate much inside the water bodies. So submarines have to depend on inertial navigation systems. These navigation systems are not as precise as we want. Like you can reach nearly equal precision of GPS, but it's not, even GPS is not that accurate for that matter. Like you would realize this once you miss out a turn while driving, or your Ola, Uber cab ride arrives on the other side of the highway. So things like that happens because of precision. So we are talking one about precision and second about the penetration inside underground or underwater bodies. So the aim of Atominics is first to measure gravity, and then second to get into a phase where we build very, very precise uh, inertial navigation system which can be used by spacecrafts and submarines. So we have multiple defense organizations as our clients. And yeah, just to go more in detail on the applications or the three main projects we have picked up for next 10 years. One that I just talked about is navigation for submarines. The first one, if you look at it, then the on-land navigation, the most common one, it's year 2020, or you can say 2021, 99.9% of the cars, vehicles are driven by humans. It's not long before everything is just taken over by autonomous vehicles. And then who's the driver in that? It's just the GPS coordinates. And you might have heard about GPS spoofing. So it's not a very robust system. Like once you intercept or jam the signals that are coming from the satellites, you can just send fake coordinates um, to any vehicle. And once everything is autonomous, a hacker can just have good fun by driving all the cars crazy in the city. So you need something which is very internal to the vehicle and it's not dependent on any external system. if you're using something which is inertial navigation system, you only need to know your starting point, and then it actively tracks where you're moving, right? So that's a phenomena, and over the year, it is either going to convert into a hybrid system, or just a complete inertial navigation system. Navigation in space is also very important, and this is just to kill the fallback of your satellites. So satellites can help you locate your position on the surface of Earth, but once you're going towards Mars or somewhere else, then your home satellites are not very useful. So in that case, what do you do? This is where GPS fingerprinting comes in. The gravity fingerprinting or the gravity signature. Everything has either a dynamic or static uh, gravity fingerprint, and you're trying to exploit that to find out your location. One interesting fact that I just read maybe last week was about gravity superhighways. So you might have, because you're all like astro enthu people, you might have heard about gravity superhighways, and these are these narrow pathways between different planets which has least gravity resistance. So once you just align your spacecraft in that zone, it automatically falls towards the planet you're aiming for. So finding these is not just a computational task, because there are so many entities. It will be very difficult, and it's a very minute change. For this, you need experimental apparatus. So a figure on right actually shows you a demonstration of our apparatus, which is a portable system. The actual images cannot be shown here because of some IP compliances, but I'll still try to show maximum photos that I can about our apparatus and parts I've been working on. Yeah, so this slide just talks about, okay, let me get this to the side. So yeah, this slide talks about a hybrid system where your Google Maps will also have a gravity data along with inertial navigation system assistance. So this is the future we are looking at after around 10 years, hopefully. So, but yeah, before reaching to an acceleration precision measurement, we have to measure force. And that's why in order, I've kept these things. So we are going to, at least at Atmanics, we are going to measure gravity first, and then acceleration, and then rotation. Yeah, what is a fundamental change? How is atom interferometry different than anything which can promise us that it's going to take us 100 times into a better zone of precision measurement? I want you guys to compare a scale and a vernier caliper. So the basic difference there is the least or the smallest division, which is 1 mm in a scale, whereas it's 10 micron in a vernier caliper. So this difference is actually dependent on how small you can measure with the scale. The gold standard right now is laser-based interferometry or laser systems just to measure lengths. And when you move from a physical to a wave-based system, the minimum division becomes the wavelength. But light waves also can provide you their wavelengths up till like nanometers. So you're kind of restricted with the industrial lasers that you have. So you have to, if you have to move to pico scale, what do you do? Your new generation vernier calipers are going to be fundamentally different from a light-based system. So what we learned in our school days, the de Broglie wavelength of matter can also act as a wave, and the effect gets very prominent at atomic level, and it becomes detectable at a very low or cold temperature environment. So researchers are now trying to exploit this quantum phenomenon and converting matter or matter nature into wave, and then trying to make measurements out of it. So this is level 1. I talked to you about 3 levels of understanding. This is like the basic level, how atom interferometry works. I might uh, reference atom interferometry somewhere as AI, but don't get confused with the computer thingy. The first image that you see in the sequence is with atoms and 3 lines, 3 red lines. These 3 red lines represent lasers. Lasers actually help you cool down atoms. So there's a very famous MIT video in which they show a situation where from all the directions you hit atom with multiple photons of a particular wavelength, and these atoms start losing energy and become cooler and very static. So once you have this static ensemble of atoms, it starts showing, or the group of atom loses its atom property or a particle property, and all of them combined together behave as like a single atom or a single matter wave. Everything is just coherent. So then what you have is a matter wave, but it's more in a ball kind of form. So just to understand how you would measure acceleration due to gravity, you just drop a ball and measure the time in how many seconds or nanoseconds or milliseconds it falls. That will give you a good understanding of what the acceleration due to gravity is. So this is exactly what we are doing. We cool down atoms, make a small ball of it, a ball which represents atomic wave, and then we drop the ball and we measure gravity. I hope this is clear. Even if it is not the level 2, we'll try to put more details to this whole sequence. Yeah, so magneto-optic trap is that ball or the atom cloud. So you can see it's quite fragile, but with specific lasers in place, you can form this. You can definitely not see the lasers because not visible to your naked eye, but you can see the fluorescence in this atom cloud. So this atom cloud is basically rubidium-87 atoms. This is from our lab. This is around 2 mm big in diameter, and the spherical ball has 10 to the power 8, so around million to 100 million atoms, all in a condensed format. So that whole thing is basically a matter wave. We are going to drop this. So the image you see on right shows this blob falling down due to gravity. I'll add one more level of detail here. To measure the gravity, you actually put this under the exposure of a particular laser beam. So you used certain lasers to cool it down, and then you remove the lasers. This atom blob started falling down. And when it's falling down, you're going to put another laser beam to expose this with. The laser beam is going to imprint its phase on this. Okay, this is the new level of detail I'm adding. The laser beam is going to imprint its phase on this blob, and you measure the phase, you get gravity. Cool. So this is how it works, very simple. But they are trying to complicate this procedure a little bit just to add precisions, and that is where interferometry comes in. So interferometry, if you're getting confused, it is just coming from the term interference and interference of waves. You have studied Young's double slit experiment and how the fringe pattern forms, and any disturbance will show you the fringe contrast. So just the lines of black and white is the fringe, and you're measuring that, and that is all about interferometry. Magneto-optic trap says optics for lasers, and magneto for just placing a magnetic field around it to condense this in as small ball as possible. Okay. Yeah, sorry, once again. Yeah, before we go to level 3 and make this even more complicated, I'll just take a small break and tell you about the different verticals in Atominics and how different departments work together to bring out this project to life. So optics, electronics, physics, and software. The mechanical is not included because I'm going to talk about this in detail later near the end of the talk. So optics is where you align all the lasers, keep lenses, mirrors, and beam splitters. So you need good amount of experience with photonics if you're working on these systems. Electronics is where you control piezo sensors or beam sequences, embedded systems, FPGA, and all these things. Also temperature control, because few electronics things which are related to the seed laser, they cannot cross a certain temperature. So you have to always use Peltier units. So all of these things are the same things you're using in your clubs and departments, either Robocon or I don't think Robocon is there anymore, but yeah, ERC, ROD, or a few other clubs that you have. Physicists are the real like heroes in this ball game, and they rule this place. They're the architect of how everything happens. They're the most smart and experienced people, at least in our team, and because it's more of a physics than an engineering problem, physicists get to decide how the experiment is going to go forward. Software comes much later in the picture when you have to show the data that you have collected. So if you have gravity data, you have to show a 3D a visualization of how the earth crust is, where are the rocks, where are the minerals, where is the water body, or gold mines or anything. Okay. So the software part comes much later. That's why we don't have many software people in the team right now. I don't know if I told you this, but Atomanics was actually started by Bitsin from 2012 batch. So Sahil is my one batch senior. He started the company along with Ravi, who was a researcher, a postdoc researcher at NUS in Center for Quantum Technology. While starting, Sahil was already working as a researcher in SUTD, and before that he was in NTU. And both of them thought of revolutionizing the navigation space along with resource exploration. So they started this, and now we have a decent enough team with these engineers on top, and the researchers or science people on top, and then the second line is full of engineers. So Gulati has worked with ISRO before on multiple projects. Matt was working. So all these people are in the mechanical team right now, and Matt was working on the Dragon pod with SpaceX before joining Atomanics. I was working, as Sanika said, in medical technologies before, and then I joined Atomanics. So yeah, bit sense of Atomanics. This is like a soft corner for everyone. But the guy in front in blue is Sanket Deshpande. He was a core member of Celestia as well, and a very dear friend of mine. He was the first employee of Atomanics. Sahil was a core member of Aerodynamics Club, and we met multiple times unknowingly because I used to work in the Kala room. Sanket was also, I don't know if your batch knows this or not, but Sanket was kind of the lead role in the balloon satellite project that Celestia completed with TIFR Hyderabad. Yeah, and my story of how I got into Atomanics is also very funny. Once Sanket posted an Instagram story just working in the lab, and I saw a 3D printer in the background, and I said, "Oh yeah, we have the same 3D printer in our office in Bangalore." And then one day he called just to get the printer fixed because there was some issue. Like by the end of the talk, we're just updating each other about past 2 years, and then he said if I would be interested in joining as a mechanical engineer full time. So like after a week I was there, and it's been a good time after that. So yeah, the journey was really good, and this is the key setup. This is just the heart of our entire machine. I'm not showing multiple other parts because it just makes the picture ugly. One thing to notice here is the vacuum chamber. So the silver part that you see, the polygonal thing, is a vacuum chamber, and it's at UHV condition, which is ultra high vacuum, taking it to 10 to the power minus 8 to 10 to the power minus 10 torr. Just to give you an idea, the atmospheric pressure around you is just 760 torr. So we are way, way, way below that. You can assume insides of this chamber to be exactly like outer space, or even better sometimes in some spaces. So yeah, this is the region where all the experimentation happens. This is where the atom dispensers or the atom gas converts into an atom cloud after laser cooling. As our first product, we have a gravimeter. So a gravimeter essentially helps you trace gravity at a higher precision level. What we memorized was just 9.8, but if we look at this image, and this image has so much information that I cannot even cover this in 1 hour, but I'm just going to ask you to glance through it and see how a small sphere converts to a different shape and different surface with different surroundings into an on-land infrastructure sphere, just with every added precision level. So if you measure 9 to 9.8 or 9.807, then you get mountains and few other things. You get tidal models, and current systems at Atominics measure this last digit, which is 7 here, which is also the 7th decimal place. We can actually go beyond that. We have measured 8 decimal place before, but this is more trustworthy figure that we have. So this can tell you what exactly is inside, and we are exploiting that to do resource exploration for big oil and gas companies to find out coal and other mineral reserves. The method that they use right now is called seismic survey, which is very cost intensive. It requires time and also digging. So it's just ideal to have something in which you don't have to dig. You just place the system on land and it tells you what kind of structure is underground. Tunneling and underground mapping comes with urban planning. Let's take Singapore, for example. I think the same situation would be there with India and other countries as well. A few things or few internal structures like pipeline or electrical wires were laid 50 years ago, and you don't exactly know where it is. Now, when you have to make another infrastructure on top of that land, you have to dig, but you don't want to damage the pipeline or your drilling tool. So you have to have an understanding of the exact location. How do you do it? Like, you don't want to dig the entire ground for that. So this is where a gravimeter comes in. You just place it on multiple position and it will tell you exactly the blueprint of where the pipeline is. Natural occurrence. This was a recent discovery. We also did not venture more into this application because we were just concerned with more money, you can say. But natural occurrences is something that someone else proposed to us, and they said a few parts of our country are sinking in the water. So water level is rising, and we want to find out, make predictions what is going to happen after 30 years. We are going to make big infrastructure investments, and we don't want to do it on the land which is going to sink after 20 years or 30 years. It's very difficult to make a prediction right now what will happen after 30 years. So there are countries which have already shifted or are going to shift their capital because the capitals are sinking right now. So if you have a network of gravimeters on the seashore, and you just make measurements of gravity, the land is not shifting, or there is very slight tectonic shift. So if the value of gravity is changing, that is definitely because of the sea level change. And if you monitor the values for 1 year, it will give you enough data, and only precise sensors like quantum gravimeters can give you precise idea. And this you can extrapolate to 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. So this is what we have stepped into now, and we are also taking pilot projects in this domain. So just with that, the tectonic shifts and volcanic eruptions can be traced much before of like even a slightest activity. Level 3. This is where it gets slightly complicated. People who have learned about laser interferometry, it's great. Some people might have read about LIGO and the discovery of gravitational waves, and the basic principle was laser interferometry. Why I am putting this in between is because it's very easy to extend an analogy towards atom interferometry if you understand laser interferometry. But it's super simple. That is also the reason why we have brought it here. You just have to look at mirror 1, mirror 2, and the green laser source. What is happening in between is that one beam of laser is being split into two, sent on different paths, reflected, and recombined. So the recombination image is seen in the translucent screen. So if it's perfectly aligned, then the translucent screen is going to show you very clear pattern of fringes. Now, if you look at mirror 2, it might be moving slightly in nanometers forward or backward. And that movement cannot be tracked, like in nanometers, cannot be tracked by any other system very precisely. But here, if you see that interference pattern or the fringe pattern gets disturbed in the two lower images, you can see the disturbance getting created. So if you measure this disturbance, it tells you exactly how much you're moving. Okay. So two things to keep in mind here is that there is one single beam or one single wave which is split into two and then recombined. That's it. And this is going to make our understanding of atomic interferometer very simple. So, but yeah, before that, you can watch a video which tells you atomic interferometry just in brief. That's Ravi, the CTO, explaining it, and also the applications of Atomanics products. Let me know if you're not able to hear the volume. Okay.
Down atoms to microkelvin temperature by shooting laser beam onto them in a particular combination of magnetic fields. Once we have atoms at microkelvin temperature, we shoot laser beam onto them again to form an interferometer with matter waves. By studying the phase shift of the interferometer, we can make very precise measurement of acceleration, rotation, and gravity. Our first product is a quantum gravimeter. It will literally paint us a picture of the Earth crust, helping us identify oil and gas and mineral reserves. It will be able to help in construction and tunneling, and also predict earthquakes and volcanic eruptions.
Okay. Yeah, that was just informative. Amrut, do you have a doubt?
No, I just joined, so you can continue, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Down atoms to
Sorry.
microkelvin temperature.
Let me go to the next slide. Yes. So level 3 of atomic interferometry is just going to extend it over the laser interferometry part. This polygonal chamber that you remember, which was holding the vacuum, it has a mirror and the cold atoms. So cold atoms is generated by lasers. You try to shrink it as much as possible, reduce the size with evaporative cooling and a few other techniques. This is the method which is also followed when you have to reach Bose-Einstein condensate. At least in gravity measurements, you don't actually need to reach BECs, but a size of 1 mm diameter of ball for around 1 million atoms would do. So you have the cold atoms and then you drop the cold atoms. This is what we learned in level 2. When you drop the cold atoms and you put the laser beam to imprint the exposure or imprint a phase before measuring it in the end by the detector, you split it. And this splitting is exactly like you saw in laser interferometry. There was one single beam or one single wave. This is a matter wave here, which was split into two. Here, these two beams or two arms of matter wave are in superposition. Okay. So these are not completely independent. They're still in superposition of different momentum and different internal state. So you first split them, and then in the second step, you recombine them. and then you detect. Okay, so there were mirrors, there were beam splitters in laser. You cannot use a physical mirror or physical beam splitter to split matter waves because it has mass. So you're using laser instead of that. So this pi by 2 and pi by 2 pulse are basically just Raman beams. So these are specific frequency laser beams that you flash onto these atoms, which does all the task of splitting and recombining. And once you have a phase contrast here, you measure that with spectroscopy. Okay, this video shows you the two superimposed quantum states and how they are coming together, and then the green light shows it's just a depiction and there is no information in this, but you can see there is a translucent link between these two balls, which shows that they're not completely independent. It's still a matter wave, just in two different locations. So yeah, and then in the end, the green light shows the spectroscopy signal. So you just do spectroscopy with this and find out the phase. The phase will tell you the value of gravity. Yeah, if there is any doubt in this, maybe we can discuss later. I'm not getting into maths of this, that gets quite complicated. This is still level 3, it goes till level 7 or something. Even I have understood only till level 5. So yeah, don't worry if this gets confusing. Just imagine a cold atom blob splitting into two and then recombine. I'm going to link a research paper which was written by Anna and Ravi. So you can read about that later to get into details, and it has few more citations as well. Yeah, and now that we have achieved interferometry signal in our lab at Atomanics, the next step is to move the tabletop lab-based system into a portable gravimeter. Okay, and this portable gravimeter has to be concise. It has so many challenges to just overcome. I'll mention these. One is miniaturization. So the image that you see on left is a basic cold atom lab, and this is the kind of optics table where you have all the apparatus and your power source, your power supplies, lens assembly, and multiple other things, the vacuum chamber, the vacuum unit. But if you have to condense all of this into a small form factor like the image shown on the right, then you need to do these specific things in which mechanical engineering plays an important role. One is miniaturization. So laser optics will have different mounts. So you cannot go with off-the-shelf mounts. You have to decide what material to use, because that will in turn reflect on the weight of the entire package. So power consumption is totally on the electronics department. You have to minimize requirements, optimize wherever possible, because you cannot have generators in the field. So you need to have like small on-the-go reserves for power and just make your way with it. Shielding is one of the biggest tasks, except vibration on the mechanical side. There are laser components and electronics which cannot work or will get severely damaged if put into moisture. So you have to make an airtight container. So hermetic sealing is one of the biggest challenges we have. Then magnetic shielding. The atoms you saw are very susceptible to any change because of magnetic field. Even something as low as 0.5 Gauss, which is residual magnetic field because of Earth's like its own state. So we can't even afford that kind of disturbance to the precision, because it's not exactly equal to 0.5 everywhere. It will keep changing. When you're trying to go to 8 decimal place of gravity, you have to shield all of this. For this, you use something called mu metal, which has very high permeability. This is slightly detailed, but you'll notice once you enter, like maximum of you are either going to, okay, removing all the CS students, but either you'll get into electronics or physics or mechanical. So shielding is a big part. Either it's RF shielding or magnetic shielding, and you use mu metal or permalloy, which is nickel and iron alloy. Heavy nickel content around 80%, and then you do heat treatment to it, either hydrogen annealing or some other vacuum treatment to get the right grain structure. So this is all that mechanical students or maybe chemical students also learn in their second year of material science course. And yeah, if there is someone from metallurgy or any other chemistry vertical, then they would be able to do this task much better than any other mechanical engineer. And the last part to get to a portable system is stability, and stability in terms of vibration and thermal as well as tilt control. I'll go briefly over each point. So thermal stability is because temperature is going to be different at least spot where you're taking measurements. Your material also expands and contracts even in nanometers or less than that, but that can affect the laser alignment or even the laser frequency. So you have to choose a material which is resistant to all these changes. You have to maintain temperature. So temperature control also includes electronics people to contribute. So thermal stability is prime focus. You'll see a picture in later slides which shows a refrigerated van that we are using for current pilots. So you would not always need a refrigerated van. Simple air conditioned van will also work, but just for safety we are doing it because this was our first pilot, and then later on we can also move to in-house or in-system cooling systems. So vibration, static ground vibration, something that seems very static to you, just the table in front of you is not at all static. It has all kinds of high frequency vibration and noise. You're not susceptible to it, you're not aware of it, but the system you have is, you're trying to make distance measurements, let's say in nanometers, but your table itself is moving in micrometers. How can you trust the values of the data that you have? So first part is detecting these vibrations, and second is minimizing or isolating these vibrations. The last slide of the talk talks about vibration control. Then the tilt control. Once you're in the field, the surface is not exactly flat. It might be at 5-degree elevation or 10 degrees, or could be more than that, or even less than that. You're trying to measure gravity, like exact gravity, and not any component of gravity. So you have to be perfectly aligned with the direction. For that, you need mechanisms to do tilt control of this 140 kg heavy setup to microradians. So this is something that we are currently doing. And just few examples of things I've worked on and how it goes, at least in the mechanical task workflow. First, the physicist will approach you with a problem statement, and then you have to think of a concept to solve that problem. In this particular case, they wanted us to make a prism and a prism holder, which is basically a mirror, and it reflects laser light from all the direction on the atoms. So this mod that you see in the center and the arrows around it, we want a prism which is just reflecting all the light towards the center. So okay, that is done, but then you need a holder, and this whole system goes in vacuum assembly. In vacuum, you cannot have any surface treatment, and you cannot have anodized metal, or you cannot have any surface impurities. So what material you're going to use, it cannot get magnetized. So you have to think about all of these constraints as well as the system's interaction with the part you're designing, and then come up with a 3D model and do virtual integration. Once that is done, you prepare the drawings with the required tolerances and give it to the manufacturer. Once it comes, you check for everything, and then make whatever item you have to make. So here you can see the major body of the CF50 flange, which is just the top of the container, is made up of aluminum. The fasteners here are titanium, and everything is cleaned in an ultrasonic bath. So this is general procedure of assembly, at least in our lab. Few more things which are comparatively simple, but requires more manpower is optical mounts. So you prepare these mounts with given tolerances, and then before you place it uh, on the breadboard of the optics table, you decide what kind of surface treatment it has to go through. So here you have to make it a bad conductor of electricity. So you put anodization. You don't want the lasers to get, so on the right side of the image, you can see all these parts are black in color, which were first silver. So here everything is just painted black because you don't want the laser light, because it's high intensity. So you don't want these to just bounce off and hurt someone. So you keep it black, and small considerations like these. So that's there. This was one of the most interesting part I worked on, and it's called the fiber periscope. Function of this is to just change height of a laser beam. So a laser beam comes from the bottom, hits on this 45-degree mirror. It goes to the top, which is again at 45 degrees to horizontal, and then this emits the small laser beam through this hole. Although the hole is big, but you're going to put a fiber in it. Whatever you manufacture, it's not going to be exactly 45 degrees, like dot precision. So you need some degree of freedom in both axes. So if you need that, how are you going to make it? If you change the material, or if you put materials which are joined together with either spring or something so that we can just flex it, it's going to change in a way that you cannot predict. When the temperature changes, different material, the spring will expand in a different way, and the metal of the flange is going to expand in a different way. So you don't want that to happen. You use the same material and you use flexure. So flexure things are just getting more and more mainstream because people don't want. We have better CNC machining capabilities, and if you don't have to join parts, there is less chance of material failure. So for just to simulate a flexure design, you have softwares like these. I use Datasflex. You can also use SolidWorks or something else, and then it will tell you when exactly the material will break. You can select material, either titanium or something, and it will tell you can flex till 5 degrees. If you go beyond that, it's going to create permanent deflection, and what you assume to be working as a spring is not a spring anymore. It's just plastic. So things like that. This is the kind of mount we make just to load our whole system. It looks maybe dirty and very simple, but if you look clearly, then all these edges have wire loop isolators. These are vibration isolators which provide you isolation or protection from all the higher frequencies. But what about the lower frequencies? So lower frequencies are very prominent because of seismic waves. And when you're out in the field measuring gravity at like in an open environment, these small frequencies are going to generate problem. The green and the pink graph in on the side actually shows amplitude versus frequency. So at lower frequencies, you have few vibrations, and then as you go ahead in the frequency range, the amplitude increases. Our system is going to get isolation from the wire rope isolators shown in this image from higher frequencies. But what about lower frequencies? So these lower frequencies can be reduced with a negative stiffness platform, or just an isolation platform which has springs but works in exactly opposite way. So if you have a spring, you try to push it and the spring will push you back. Whereas a negative stiffness platform, you try to push the spring and the spring will just pull you forward. So researchers have found that this method becomes very suitable for lower frequency isolation. The thing on top here is a seismometer. So if you keep your mobile on top of this system, you might see a clear signal which will say that there is no acceleration, there is no vibration, whereas you need very high-end equipments. This part is also very, very costly. So you need something like this and a different ADC channel just to interpret the signals of these. So we measure this, and the image that you see here, the graph, it shows blue and orange graph of the vibration that has been damped. So if you just keep the system on the table, you get green and pink graph, whereas you keep it on this small box, which is a negative stiffness platform, it gives you 100 times more isolation, or 100 points shielding, 100 times shielding from the lower frequency vibrations. So yeah, these are the things we work on day-to-day basis. There are multiple other things, but this I think gives you a much clearer idea of what our company is about and what we are doing as mechanical engineers. So if you have any specific doubts, you can go forward and ask that. If you did not understand any sheet or slide, then you can ask me that particular question and I'll explain it again. So thank you all for your patient listening. I hope this was not as boring as you have.
No, it was really great. Like initially you said that you might find some of the things counterintuitive, but the way you explained them, like by visualizing stuff,
Oh,
it was great. Yeah.
oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, because so for me it has become very normal over the year, and I might be using jargons here and there. But if you have absolutely zero idea about that, it'll just
Like you
throw
made it
in.
very simple to understand.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, yeah.
So
Cool.
if
Is
anyone
there?
has any questions, then they can go ahead.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah. Go on. No need to
Sir,
call. You can just call Akshay.
yeah, okay, Akshay. So, in the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned that you can use this for space navigation as well. So, can
Yeah.
you elaborate on that front?
Okay. Yeah, space navigation. So every point in your observable universe is being influenced by other bodies, other celestial bodies, either close or far. So everything is going to have a gravitational impact, and if you can measure that gravity precisely, because uh, you have two exactly identical items with you, let's say, uh, they look similar, but when you try to measure the lengths very, very precisely, you'll find out that they're different. So if you might think uh, that you have two fingers and both are experiencing exactly same gravity, then that's not the case. So in the same way, the outer space has all these points with different gravity signatures. If you have a device which can be taken to a place and will tell you the exact gravity of that point, and you have a gravity map, or you just have a rough plot, you'll be able to coarsely pinpoint where you are at with that map. But more you get on the precision side, it'll tell you, okay, you're closer to this unit, or you're this much closer to this body. And what I'm talking about is more like a future, maybe in 2040, and you have your travel pod, you're just roaming around anywhere on earth, uh, underground, underwater, and on land, and then you just decide to just fly off to Mars. You can do that without changing the GPS system, or you can do that without changing your uh, in the pod navigation system. So it's the same system which works on every front, because it works on gravity and not based on satellite or anything else.
Okay.
Does that make it clear?
Yeah. So, can you tell a bit more about how that can be miniaturized? Because if the probably the first think first place of application for this will be navigation satellites and satellites which are using for imagery of the different objects in space. So um, apart from the payload, the size is the expense basically. So
Yeah,
and
yeah, true. Because you don't have much space in that. There is already a satellite experiment, and we are using their laser system. There is one called MAIUS experiment, MAIUS. It was a sounding rocket experiment, so you can look at that and their internal structure, how they miniaturized it. I've mentioned all the points. We basically do that, but if you want more visual picture of how you miniaturize everything, the copper coils or the vacuum chamber, everything, you can look at MAIUS experiment. There is also one by ESA. They have put it on one of their satellites, and there is a company called Cold Quanta, uh, which makes cold atom cells. So these are glass cells. It's just like a normal glass you have, uh, as small as this. Like I have a candle here, but yeah, just as small as this, and it has all the cold atom experiment set up. But these things are super expensive and more available for a general use and not just for gravimetry. So also, because I forgot to mention this earlier, if you're in space, you don't measure gravity in one direction. You rather go for FTGG, which is full tensor gravity gradiometry, and it gives you a full tensor, so you have idea about each and every direction. Yeah, and that is more explained in the research paper. I'm going to link later, so you can have a look at that. Yeah, next question. Yeah, you can just unmute and ask the question. I think it'll be difficult for me to.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned about hi Akshay. So you mentioned about gravity map of the Earth. So wouldn't that require visiting every spot? And do you plan on measuring it on the surface or in orbit or something?
Oh, yeah, very good question indeed. Because there have already been projects, and it's not like ours is the first setup which is going to measure gravity. There are classical instruments which have already measured gravity. We might just be adding another precision level to it. So there are few websites from where you can just download the gravity map of BITS Goa or Bogmalo or anything. So you can have tidal models like gravity variation due to tides. This is how you'll find it, but the tidal model also hides the gravity information overall. So yeah, there are companies which are doing it. There are satellites also which are doing it. We have a satellite project somewhere in the future, so we'll also contribute to that data. But on land, you can just keep adding extra precision level by a moving van or something. So just like Google Car has a project where they're just mapping the entire city. In the same way, Grab here in Singapore has a project where they're just mapping everything and linking it to GPS location. This is what will be done with gravimetry too.
Okay, I just have one more question to add to that.
Okay.
So while measuring the gravitational field as you're going to a very high precision, have we considered how the man-made things and all the buildings and new constructions would affect your data?
Sorry, can you ask again?
Oh, okay. I was saying that if you're going to such a high precision, how would man-made things like new constructions and other things affect your data?
Oh yeah, they do, and that's why this will be a dynamic data. If you can see this image, wait. Now this might start again.
Down atoms to microcalorimetry.
I hate this. Sorry. Yeah. If you look at this, then only the last precision level gets affected by the structure, which is built on the land. Everything else remains same, and this is very susceptible to change. It will keep changing, and once you go to the next level, so there was a joke in the lab, and this is based on a real story. There were researchers who went out in the field to measure gravity. They measured gravity till the 8th decimal place, which is one level after this, and then they came back after lunch, took reading, and the readings had changed. The reason behind that was that they had sandwich. So, so even food in your belly is going to change the values at that precision level. So it's very, very fragile. But yeah, the other 6 digits remain exactly the same because they're more dependent on Earth, tectonic shifts, tides, the sun, moon, Earth, everything. Yeah, so it is susceptible, and you'll have to change it. You'll have to keep taking multiple data points and average them out to have a better value. Yeah, it's not like this is a completely bulletproof method. It has its drawbacks.
Hello.
Does that make it clear?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we can take 2 more questions. How much time is remaining? It's not, I guess.
Yeah, we can take 2 more questions, like for 5 more minutes.
Hello. Can I ask a question?
Hi, Saif.
Hi, Akshay sir. Thank you for explaining in such elaborate detail and simple terms. I mean, very interesting concept. So I have a very basic question. You mentioned about using the same technology for space, but a single directional measurement won't really help in space, right? And as you said, you got to measure in the entire gravity tensor for every point.
Yeah.
So doing the same thing on Earth, would it make sense now that instead of measuring gravity in just one direction, if you measure gravity, like you measure the entire gravity tensor, so would that help you unravel more data on Earth? And
yeah, totally. There you go, Ishan. Your answer is there. So it's not just because of like the internal structure. You can take the full tensor and it will tell you, because there are going to be buildings, at least in the beginning, only on one side or something. The other side remains unaffected mostly. So yeah, the full tensor gravity radiometer will help in that. Yeah. Thanks for the idea, sir.
Thanks.
Hello.
Akshat, I have one.
Yeah, hi, Prakhar.
Yeah. I just want to ask that in the slide 13, you mentioned about gravitational waves, like the relation between interferometry and gravitational waves. Can you explain that?
Oh yeah, there is no relation between that. This was the experiment principle which was used to detect gravitational waves. So yeah,
okay.
like when you have laser interferometry, okay, but I can still explain. So this mirror 2 is, as I said, very slightly moving back and forth. So if you have a gravitational wave affecting the space, then mirror 2 is slightly going to go back or forth with respect to mirror 1. Like, the mirror 1 is not moving. It is assumed to be static in that direction, like the translation direction of mirror 2. So if a gravitational wave hits your space, then it is going to move mirror 2 slightly far away from the green laser source. And when that happens, you're going to see a shift in the interference pattern. And this is how they detected it. And if you want to see example of extreme engineering, then I think LIGO is the way to go. They have all the research papers published, and you can look at their kilometer long laser beam paths and how exactly they kept all these mirror static, isolating them from all vibrations. Like if we are doing vibration isolation to level 10, maybe they are at level 30 or 35 at vibration isolation, because they have huge mirror as big as a room, so things like that. So yeah, you can definitely read up more on LIGO's website and their research papers. So they have used laser interferometry before, because this was planned much before the advent of atomic interferometry. But if you read about their papers now, they're trying to shift to atom-based interferometry, and it's actually more space conservative, you can say. Like lasers would need long beam paths, whereas atoms don't need that. So a laser system is going to be big, but if you can just compress the LIGO lab into the size of our whole campus if you want to, like if you switch from laser to atoms.
Okay, thanks. That was nice.
Yeah. Okay. Should we take one last bonus because we have 1 minute? Okay.
Like if it is okay, sir, can we like take maybe 2 or 3 more questions? Like we have been getting a lot of
fine with me. Fine.
like
with me.
if you are free.
No, it's fine. Let's go for 3 then.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, Vivek.
So, do you have any plans regarding expanding the fields of usage of this sensor? So, like one thing that comes to my mind is archaeology. To map underground structures, you could use this to much more precise measurements.
Oh yeah, awesome. And I can tell you an example. And they use this in Europe somewhere. There was a church and they wanted to find a coffin of the king, the emperor, long ago, like who was buried under there, but they did not want to destroy the entire church just to find out this coffin. So they used gravimetry and found out the coffin. So it's exactly where you want to. Yeah, archaeology is one of the best examples. Maybe we are not focusing on it right now because projects like these are very capital intensive, and you might want to provide the solution to firms which have at least $1 billion in account, because each single measurement goes or costs you 300 400 US dollars, sorry, 300 400K US dollars. So yeah, archaeology would definitely be there in 10 years or maybe 5 years, not sure. But there are government funded projects which keep happening. So if government is interested in finding something, then yeah, you can
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is about the like the level of precision. You mentioned that it's it gets very fragile as you get more precise. So at that level of precision, is it even useful to us? Because if it's going to be that fragile and it's going to change very rapidly, like is there any point in going that precise?
Okay, awesome. I don't know why, but I had an idea what kind of questions would be asked. So there is one more bonus video that I have to show you, and this can show you how fragile or susceptible the atom cloud is. Okay, so in this video, the atom cloud is formed. It's trying to stay static, and I just try to insert a stainless steel rod. It's not even magnetic. It's just a simple stainless steel rod near the vacuum chamber, and you can see how much it affects. Like it's not magnetized. It's not like making any airflow towards it. Nothing. But still, it changes. And then maybe I can tell you more about how we try to solve that and how it doesn't become a big problem. Wait, Anna.
Okay, this is actually bad because it's disappearing immediately. If everything is balanced, then the mop should kind of slowly expand. So if there's one field, the magnetic field is pushing it too much in one direction, then when you turn off the quad coils, I give it a 0. You give it a 50.
Yeah, look at it right now.
So yeah, basically if you
Can you
If
switch
you have
it
too
off?
strong of a magnetic field, if you turn off the quad, then like.
Yeah. Okay. So at least this will show you how fragile that cloud is, even with external systems. And we are talking about like picometer precision, let's say, in terms of distance. So small magnetic field variations uh, cannot have its influence. Otherwise, your data will get corrupted. Um, Solution to that is averaging first, like very basic mathematical answer to it. You keep on averaging all your values, and if there is any change, then uh, then you can just turn the entire machine in 180 degrees, and it will try to negate all the effect which was created by magnetic fields or something else in one direction. Uh, Second method is to use two species of rubidium atoms. So right now we are just using 87. We have also found a mod for 85. So when you use two rubidium atoms or two different species isotopes, then you're going to have uh, one system but two mods which are going to show different effect because they have different mass. And if you find out the contrast between these two as well, then you can just remove all the errors from the picture. Does that make it clear? So the model you're seeing right now, actually the first model was rubidium 85 and the lower one is rubidium 87. You won't be able to track the difference, but yeah, when both of these action in conjunction, then you have like all these other parameters removed. And the last part also, which I mentioned in shielding, which was magnetic shielding, that is very effective, like very, very effective. People have 3 layers of magnetic shields. You can read the Mayus experiment. Wait, I can show you the photo of Mayus. So yeah, if you see here, there is a three-layer system inside, under which the entire vacuum assembly is kept. So this mu metal shielding is very strong. It can give you like 1,000 times more shielding compared to like anything else. So you know, instead of preventing ourselves from going and exploring more on the fragile side, it also is pushing us towards the edge of material science, so that we can just bring more material, do more research on other fronts, so that we can take one project to another level. So yeah, I hope that makes it slightly clear.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And now we can take the last question. Wait for a second, just a second. Are you able to see this image? So what we are trying to do in our lab, this is exactly the same thing, but they conducted the experiment in microgravity and they sent this rocket up. So this was a sounding rocket and they had similar setup. Instead of just making cold atom cloud, they went ahead with Bose-Einstein condensate in this flying rocket. So this is still the best example that we have till date. So the research group is called Qantas. You can go read more about them. And this was their atom chip. So like we had Mirror, and these people have an atom chip in which they just create the Bose-Einstein condensate. So yeah, don't worry much about these things. You can never, like, at least in my experience, I've learned you cannot understand everything in detail, no matter how lucrative that seems. So you just have to find your niche, try to like provide best solutions you can in your department, and then that will just help you contribute in the entire project. Yeah, yeah, that's also, you can go for the last question. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
hear you.
okay.
Does
Cool.
anyone have any question?
Yeah, this last one can be anything.
Yeah, like
just
I
not
had a
subject.
question.
Yeah,
Okay, how small are you planning to miniaturize your setup? Like, what would be the dimensions?
Okay, the current system is just the interferometer part is around 700 mm in diameter. You can assume that to be a cylinder. So yeah, 70 centimeter cylinder. We are thinking of going again in 5 years somewhere around this size, like a JBL speaker. But
Nice.
yeah,
All
that's
the
very
precision,
ambitious.
such
Yeah,
small
maybe
space.
if you have a talk after 5 years, we still might not have reached even half of it. But yeah, if everything goes right, then that's the place, at least where the interferometer will sit.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay then.
Yeah, cool. It was awesome to catch up with all of you.
Yeah.
Also, like a lot of my friends joined. So thanks to you guys for joining.
No,
Yeah.
we thank you,
Good.
sir, for like having this really informative but also well explained lecture. We hope to have you again soon, sometime. And
Let's have someone else from the company. Like maybe they
okay,
can talk about electronics.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Maybe next December we'll have much more to tell you. Cool. Okay, guys. Take care of your health. The
Yeah.
new
Do you?
strand is in the market. Just be aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Good luck. Happy New Year. Enjoy your
Same to
holiday.
you. Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
thank you.
Sanika, can you share the recordings with me later?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir.
They
We will
will be
also.
uploaded on YouTube.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Maybe
I'll
before.
share the link.
Yeah, before that we can just discuss. There might be 1 or 2 images. We'll have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.